Yo, welcome back to the channel, y'all. Today we're going to be making one of my favorite childhood classics with a twist, Dunkaroos Cheesecake. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you are subscribed because I'll be dropping weekly recipe videos. Alright, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get started on the crust. Now I'm going to be using Dunkaroos cereal here. You can find it at any of the local grocery stores in your area. But you can also use the actual Dunkaroos cookies if you can find them. That would be a lot more expensive to do. So I'm going with the cereal here, but to each his own, do what you want. This process is going to be pretty much the same as making a traditional graham cracker crust, except for we're not going to add sugar to it because the cereal already has a lot of sugar, so it's not really needed. But all we're going to do here is really just go ahead and add these to a food processor. I'm using about 2 cups of the cereal, and then get those blended up nice and fine. Then I'm going in with some butter. Now the butter is going to kind of help your crust form together when you're adding it to your springform pan, so it is necessary. And you kind of just want the consistency to look like wet sand. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and get that crust over into my springform pan. I'm using a 8-inch springform pan, but you can also use a 9 or a 10-inch, just depending on what you have, but you might have to adjust your cooking time a bit just because of the thickness of the cheesecake itself. Go ahead and pack your crust down with your hands just to make sure it is nice and even, and then you're going to bake it on 350 for about 8 minutes. Alright, once it's done baking, the next step that I'm going to do may seem very weird if you haven't made a cheesecake before, but this part is necessary as we're going to do a water bath. I'll explain a little bit about that later on, but go ahead and double wrap your pan with foil. This is just to ensure that water does not get into our cheesecake from our water bath. So yeah, do not skip this step. Wrap your springform pan in foil. I use 2 layers. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and get started on our cheesecake mixture. So I'm going to go in with about 3 blocks of cream cheese here. These are 8-ounce blocks, and I have left them sitting out so they are room temperature. I definitely highly recommend you do this when they're at room temperature, or it's not going to mix right and it's going to be very tough to form your cheesecake here. So yeah, let them sit out for a while. Then I'm going to go ahead and add some sugar, some sour cream, and my vanilla. As always, the exact ingredients will be in the description box below, so feel free to check that out. As you can see in the video, I first mixed my cream cheese by itself with my hand mixer, and then I added in all of my other ingredients just to kind of prevent everything from flying all over the place. It's still going to be messy, but at least you want to limit the mess. Lastly, we're just going to add in our eggs. I'm adding them in one at a time, both the egg white and the yolk. There are some recipes that separate them out. You can do that if you want and whip the egg whites and fold them in later, but for this one in particular, I want a thick cheesecake, so I'm going to add them both in at the same time. Now you do want to scrape the sides of your mixing bowl, as some of the cream cheese will get stuck to the side, so you just want to scrape that off and then give it another good mix to make sure everything is incorporated and mixed well evenly. Now that our cheesecake batter itself is done, we're going to add in some sprinkles. Now these are going to give a great pop of color, but you don't want to overdo it here. I see a lot of these recipes will overdo the sprinkles and they bleed all over the cheesecake, and then your cheesecake just looks like a mess with colors all over the place. But all you want here is just that nice pop of color, so we're going to mix them in last and then just kind of fold them in gently. Now that your batter's done, we can go ahead and assemble our cheesecake. The first thing I'm going to do is put my crust in a baking dish or a roasting pan, or in my case it's actually a cast iron skillet, but use a roasting pan if you have it. And then I'm going to just pour some of the batter. Now I'm only going to do about half of the batter right now, and you'll see why in just a second, as I'm going to add some cookies in the middle. I would recommend you breaking these cookies up a bit or crushing them slightly and then putting them in your cheesecake. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and add the remaining half of my cheesecake batter on top of those to kind of fill out everything else, and then what you want to do is just kind of smooth that over the top. Now the next part is just completely up to you if you want to add a little flair to your cheesecake just like I did, but I'm going to add some of those Dunkaroos cereal around the edge. This is super easy to do. It just takes a little bit of extra time, but it does give it a nice look, and you can even make a D in the middle if you want to make it look like an actual Dunkaroos cookie. I have done that before as well. Now, the final thing before we actually pop this into the oven is completing our actual water bath. This is going to prevent the cheesecake from cracking in the oven as they need to cook in a moist environment. So to do this, we're just going to pour some boiling water around the cheesecake in the roasting pan, or in my case, the cast iron skillet. But this is essential to making any cheesecake. You'll see pretty much all cheesecake recipes call for this, as you don't want to crack. Now you're going to want to bake this for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes on 300, and you'll know it's done when only the center remains a little bit jiggly, and it'll finish cooking once you remove it. You're going to have to let that cool for at least 4 to 6 hours, but I usually let it cool overnight and then remove from the springform pan, and voila, this is what you have, a Dunkaroos Cheesecake. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, as I do drop weekly recipe videos just like this. And if you do make it, make sure you tag me on social media. I love seeing what you guys create. Enjoy, y'all.